All right, welcome everyone. Today's presentation is part of the Culture Builds Communities webinar series. This community-based project is designed to help Native communities plan and develop cultural facilities. Culture Builds Communities is a project of the Association of Tribal Archives, Libraries, and Museums. Major funding is provided by the Institute of Museum and Library Services and the National Museum of the American Indian. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having us. We're going to get started. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to Returning Home, Borrowing Objects from the Collections of the National Museum of the American Indian. Today, we're going to be talking specifically about loans. My name is Rachel Shabika, and I am the Supervisory Registrar for the National Museum of the American Indian. We know that requesting an object loan from a large museum can seem needlessly complicated, overwhelming, and expensive. So this session, we're going to attempt to demystify the process a little and explain the steps that we usually go through when considering loans. Our presenters will look at object selection, conservation planning, mount making, packing, shipping, and insurance. In addition to myself and my colleague from NMAI, we have two colleagues from outside NMAI with us to provide examples of loans to tribal communities and the journeys that objects take to get there. Next slide, please. It's coming.
I'm working on it.
Okay.
It's not letting me. There we go.
Perfect. So Kelly Ford and I will speak about the loan process from the museum's perspective and try to give some helpful information for future loan requests. We are also privileged to be joined by Curtis Quam, who's museum technician and cultural educator at the Ashiwiawan Museum, and Lydia Forhorns, the general manager at the new Shakopee Museum. Next slide, please. A little bit about the NMAI collection. The majority of our current collections have their foundation in another museum, the Museum of the American Indian, which was in New York City. George Gustav High was a mining engineer, and he began collecting Native American artifacts while working in Arizona. Soon he became an avid collector, and he founded the Museum of the American Indian, or MAI, in New York City in 1916, and it opened to the public in 1922 at Audubon Terrace. He established a research branch additionally in the Bronx, where collections were available for research and study. In the 1970s and 80s, as the museum fell on hard times financially, discussions as to the future of the collection began to take place. The National Museum of the American Indian Act was enacted by Congress on November 28, 1989, and the law established the National Museum of the American Indian as part of the Smithsonian Institution. Today, NMAI's mission, with an emphasis on partnership with Native peoples and their contemporary lives, has spurred different collections development strategies and programmatic efforts, as well as consultations with community representatives on appropriate standards of care, modes of exhibition and interpretation, and the museum's overall operations. Essentially, NMAI views its long-term stewardship as the dutiful care and protection of what essentially belongs to others. Next slide, please. Loans then are a crucial part of the mission of the museum, as they provide a pathway for collections to reside in their communities of origin. The registration department at NMAI has many tasks, including bringing new acquisitions into the collection, processing those acquisitions, and maintaining the inventory of the collections. But additionally, registration is the office of record for loans both to NMAI exhibitions and from NMAI collections. We generally have about 40 to 50 outgoing loans that we're managing at different stages in the development process. Most years we get around 10 to 15 new loans out the door to other museums. Most of our loan requests total about 20 objects or less, but a few go as high as 150 objects. While most of our loans are for exhibition purposes, we also lend for ceremonial use, programmatic use, and educational use. Next slide. If you are considering requesting a loan from NMAI, we want to set you up for the best possible experience. So we hope that some of this information will be useful to you in your planning process. I'll speak a bit about what we expect about what you can expect as you plan for a loan and the loan request process. And then Kelly will speak about the process once the loan is approved and the logistics of making sure the objects get out the door on time and into your exhibit. Next slide, please. So all exhibits start with research. One way to virtually access the NMAI collections are through the Smithsonian's Collections website, which is seen here. You can search archival records, photos and video collections, object collections, and all types of media for all the Smithsonian units. While we've recently added a larger portion of NMAI's collection to the site, it does not contain everything in NMAI's collection. So you may want to also think about putting in a collection report request. Next slide, please. To do that, you head over to the NMAI website. That's here. If you'd like to see a report of specific types of items from your community, you would go to this page, which is located under Explore Collections, Accessing the Collection, and Request an Object Collections Report. Our staff from the museum will search our full database of collections that fall under your search criteria and send you a report of what we have, along with the catalog information. Next slide, please. To submit that request, you would provide information about yourself, your organization, what you're researching, the types of collections you'd like to learn about using this online form. You could also request to visit the collections using a research request, though at this time, access to the collections is on hold due to COVID. No surprise to anyone. Next slide, please. The next big planning element is time frame. Once you know what objects you'd like to request, a loan request should be submitted 12 months before your exhibit opening for 20 objects or less, and 18 to 24 months if you're going to be requesting a lot more objects, or if you happen to be in Canada, for example, or if you're an international organization. It might seem like a long time, but in order to work on multiple loan requests, our own exhibit needs, and all the other projects that we have going on, we need to schedule time and space for work to happen over the course of those 12 months. Next slide, please. Kelly will cover this in more detail in her section of the presentation, but budget is also a big element of the planning process to keep in mind. As we all know, loans are not cheap. Borrowers usually are expected to cover the expenses for conservation treatment if needed, mount making, packing and shipping, and potential courier travel. There can be grants found that can help ease the cost of loans. Next slide. And just to give you some idea, this is by no means an exhaustive list of some grant funding agencies that could help lift a financial burden for your exhibit if you were interested in looking into them. NMAI also strives to try and do the best that we can to keep costs to, the best that we can do within the scope of your project. Next slide. So now you have a plan for your exhibit, and your object list is mostly finalized. It's time to submit a formal loan request. Remember, the earlier, the better. Aim for 12 to 24 months for loans of less than 20 objects, as you saw in that earlier slide, because the sooner you get it in, the sooner you get into our queue, the more likely it is that we can accommodate you at the time that for the timeline that you're looking for. Next slide, please. To make that request, you'd go back to our website, and under that Explore Collections contact page, you'll see this paragraph about borrowing objects from the museum. The link lets you email me. Hello. And you can get in touch with me directly about your loan request. Additionally, my email is sitting right here on this web page. So if you have any questions before you want to submit a request or at any of the planning stages, you can feel free to reach out to me earlier. We're here to answer your questions because we want you to have as smooth a process as possible, and it makes it easier on us. So remember this website. Next slide, please. So my response to your email would take you through the remaining steps. The first step would be to send an official letter to the NMAI director requesting the loan. Additionally, there are some forms that we would ask you to complete for your request package, and you'll need to send me those completed forms, which I will send to you, and then a copy of your letter and a general facility report for your building. So let's let's see. Next, so, sorry, losing my place. The general facility report would be a conglomerate document of all the information about the building that you either are building or already have built. And we're going to be doing another webinar on that at a later date. So don't let that big document scare you. Next slide, please. Once we have all your information in the loan package, the next step for us is our internal curatorial council review. At the museum, the curatorial council is a staff group that reviews all things collections related, new acquisitions, incoming and outgoing loans, other kinds of requests regarding objects. Council meets the last Thursday of every month and makes recommendations to the director, who ultimately makes the decision. So ultimately, it's technically not up to us, but Council's recommendations pull some weight. Next slide, please. For loans, there are multiple criteria that council members take into consideration. They are listed on this slide in no particular order, but they have a lot to do with the availability of the objects. If NMAI already has it in an exhibition, we really don't tend to take it off exhibition. What are the current programs that NMAI is doing? What are other projects that are already in our queue? So, these are the things that we're going to be considering when we look at a request for loan. We do take into consideration, some of these are based on the borrower. For example, the ability of the borrowing institution to provide a secure installation and meet environmental standards. For example, for that, the Met is likely to have ideal environmental conditions, but because we also take Native involvement in projects very seriously, we'll assess their application more heavily based on that. In contrast, there are some tribal institutions that may not have perfect museum conditions. But we're going to want to work with you to consider ways to mitigate less than ideal collections. And we also remember that it frequently depends on the objects. So as Curtis will speak about later, we have a very large loan to the Zuni community, and those objects came from the desert. They can be in the desert some more. It's one of those things that we always take that into consideration. Ultimately, we do our best to prioritize loans to tribal communities, but obviously logistics and capacity can sometimes be a roadblock. So again, my best advice to you is to submit that loan request early, ask as many questions as you can, be in discussion with the museum about your project as early as possible, because we're here to help your project succeed. Next slide. And that is phase one. So now your loan has been approved. Kelly's going to talk about what goes on at the museum to get those pieces out the door and into your exhibit. Kelly, I'm throwing it over to you for the next slide.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Kelly Ford. I'm the Assistant Registrar at the museum. And once a loan is approved by our council and director, the bulk of the work at NMAI begins. We'll now talk about the steps required to prepare objects for outgoing loan. As you can see, there are a number of steps required to get a loan out the door, and this is why we ask for all loan requests at least 12 months in advance of the start date. We'll talk about each one of these in detail now. If you require publication quality images and we don't already have available copies, new photos can be taken through our photography office for $75 an image. Before conservation treatment and mount making can begin, the NMAI loan team will review your exhibition and case drawings to ascertain how the object will be displayed, which can affect its conservation treatment, and how it will be mounted, which is essential for the mount maker to know. This is an example of the exhibition drawing for our American show. A drawing on this scale gives us an idea of where the objects will be located in your gallery, where HVAC vents are, doors are, and how they're all related in relation to the object itself. We'll also review the specific case drawings and the proposed case materials. This is an example of the case for one of the loan objects to our Americans exhibition. And this drawing helps the mount maker to understand the orientation of the object within the case and what kind of mount he or she will need to make. And if you can see, there's a small telegraph key that's in this exhibition. The American Institute for Conservation shares databases of exhibition materials that have been AUDIE tested and indicate how appropriate each material is for short or long-term exhibition. This can thereby help borrowers choose NMAI approved materials. And this is a great example. This is a Seneca tump line that was recently on loan to the Seneca Art and Culture Center at Ganondagan. Prior to the loan approval, the Conservation Department conducted a preliminary survey of the objects to determine if they were stable enough for travel and exhibition. The extent to which the objects need to be treated was also determined, which provides the borrower with an estimated number of treatment hours. Keep in mind, conservators charge approximately $120 per hour. This will give the borrower an idea of how much the conservation treatment will cost. Time and cost estimates will be provided at the outset so borrowers can prioritize their choices of objects if necessary. Conservation then chooses an outside conservator with whom the borrower will contract directly. Conservation treatment is conducted in-house at the Cultural Resources Center and can incorporate tribal consultation prior to the treatment. An example of an inexpensive treatment is $690 we had recently for one object that underwent 6 hours of treatment. Larger loans will of course be more expensive. 20 objects that went out on a recent loan cost $17,000 to treat. And this is a picture of one of our conservators, Kathleen, working on a Dakota women's cape that is currently on loan to the Minnesota Historical Society. And here's an example. This is Fritz Schulder's painting Indian and Rhinoceros when it was being prepared for loan to the Denver Art Museum. Similar to conservation treatment, NMAI will choose an outside mount maker with whom the borrower will contract directly. The mounts are created based on the display orientation in the exhibition case drawings. Depending on the complexity of the mount and how long it takes to make, mounting for one object can cost a few $100s, whereas a larger loan of 33 objects recently cost approximately $6,000 to mount. And here's an entirely different type of mount. This is an Apsiloke man's shirt, which is currently on loan to the Coeur d'Alene tribe. If object values have not been previously assigned, the borrower may have to contract with an appraiser to provide values for insurance purposes. Once established, we'll send our outgoing loan agreement that covers the basics like your contact and exhibit information, loan dates, the object list with insurance values, and who will provide the insurance coverage. About a month before the loan ships, NMAI will request from the borrower proof of insurance coverage, which includes wall-to-wall coverage and a list of any policy exclusions, in the form of a certificate of insurance. The Smithsonian requires property coverage in place for all loan objects, ideally fine arts coverage if possible. If the borrower is not able to provide coverage, insurance can be purchased through Smithsonian's Risk Management Office, and the borrower then pays a premium. As with the other loan preparation services, the borrower contracts directly with a fine art shipping company to pack and ship the loan. The borrower can make the packing and shipping arrangements themselves with our approval. If not, we typically solicit 2 to 3 quotes from different fine art shipping companies with whom we have a relationship, and then we pass those quotes on to the borrower and they can make the final decision. Not surprisingly, it's usually the least expensive one, of course. And we'll take images of the loan objects as they're packed, so there's no question about how they will be repacked at the end of the loan. And this case that you see here is packed with objects that were recently lent to the Pueblo of Oaxaca. We usually check out our crate storage to see if there are any available crates that can be reused. If so, it's significantly cheaper to have an existing crate retrofitted rather than have a new one built from scratch. It can cost just a few $100s to retrofit a crate, whereas a new one usually costs over $1,000. This is an example of a crate Rick Yamada retrofitted for a Hunkpapa Lakota dance club that went on loan to the South Dakota Historical Society. And here's Rick packing the dance stick and its mount that you can see above it into the retrofitted crate. Packing and shipping combined for one object can be as little as $2,000, and a larger loan has been as high as $15,000, depending on multiple factors, such as how far away from the museum, how far away the museum is from DC, how fragile the objects are, and what level crate is required for a safe journey. The shipper is contracted directly by the borrower, and often the same company will handle both the packing and shipping. NMAI always sends a courier for object installation, before COVID, of course. We've been doing some digital courier trips in the last couple of months. Sometimes it's one of our on-staff conservators or registrars, and sometimes it's the contract mount maker. It just all depends on the needs of the object. We will have created an outgoing condition report before the objects leave the CRC, and that will be updated and signed by both our courier and a representative from the borrowing museum. Depending on the length of the installation, a courier trip can cost anywhere from $400 to $2,000. And our outgoing loans are typically approved for 1 year or a maximum of 2. And if the borrower wishes to renew, then council reconsiders the request. And if the director approves it, the loan is renewed for another, usually 2 years. And now I'm going to pass things on to Curtis.
Okay, hello, good afternoon. Hope you all have been doing well during this pandemic. It's been a pretty interesting, wild ride for everyone. I think also for us here in Zuni. And I really appreciate everybody's time, and Rachel and Kelly and Atom for allowing us to share our experiences working with the Smithsonian and our objects here. So for me, I've been with the museum here, the Ahshowee Awan Museum in Zuni, New Mexico, since July, 19 years. And I actually unofficially, in an odd way, came with the last part of the loan. And a really good friend of mine was the curator of the exhibition, and unexpectedly had to leave the village. So from there, I've kind of filled in that little void there that had to be filled. So I hit the ground running, working with this loan, coming in, and learned a lot of different things. So everything that Rachel and Kelly had mentioned about the packing and all the conditions that come with it, definitely stick to those. And I know definitely the dollar amount might kind of dissuade people from doing that, but these objects, when they're home, they're invaluable. The image that you see on the screen is actually our museum logo for the Ahshowee Awan Museum and Heritage Center. And this logo actually came from one of the pots that was loaned to us. And this has really established a lot of our identity as a museum. And also, this has helped a lot of understanding of a lot of different things and bridging the gaps. Growing up in Zuni, definitely we're used to moving out and about and knowing how protocol is in the ceremonial side of things. So not knocking the discipline and the science and the understanding of the educational setting of taking care of things. We also have a way of meaning us as Native communities. I think we all have an inherent and ability to take care of things. And a lot of that is important. And like I mentioned, we go around, move around the community, and sometimes beyond that. I know I've definitely been hiking, whether it just be for my health or for hunting or for whatever it might be, going out there and you think you're in a remote spot of the village or the reservation area, and then you come across a site that has pottery sherds, and then you look at these, and I always wonder, it's like, I wonder what made this place so special? What is it that allowed life to continue. You look around and you know, you see a lot of different things that really help and contribute to your identity as a community member from where you come from. So we just get these pieces of pottery at times. If we're lucky and fortunate, we get the whole thing. And seeing an image like our museum logo for the first time in the pot itself, it was really now a really eye-opening experience. And it's something that happens continuously. When I first saw it, it's like, wow, this is so great. And then it takes a couple more days and a couple more years to really appreciate all the intricate lines and details, the artistry of it, of course, the aesthetics of it, yes. But the meaning behind a lot of that, what we see and what we interpret of this, what we believe to be as a turkey, or what I believe to be as a turkey, and how they saw that. And you look at the wings stretching out, and that's kind of how we see the feathers relating and equating to a lot of our views into the natural world. And that can only be done by looking at things from the past. I know for a lot of us in Native communities, we're struggling at times, and we're also on the fence of what is appropriate, from the museum setting to our cultural setting. And knowing that we have to straddle these two different ways of doing things and understanding things. And hopefully coming to a point where we come from these communities to work with people from the museums and have a good understanding of why it is we're doing the work we're doing. And for myself, I never thought I'd be a part of a museum, but I've been here for 19 years. And the odd thing is I've been the longest running employee of the museum. And I never had set that goal in my life at all. It's just, you know, I started to value and appreciate a lot more of the objects coming in and what they mean and the effect they have on people when they come in, and the importance of having something present within groups when they come in and to see. And I know the younger kids, when they come in, they probably don't understand yet, to see how valuable these collections are. So again, you know, now working with the dollar amount and insurance and all the other things that we definitely have to really consider and worry about, it does not equate to the impact of seeing it in person. And if we have the ability within the loan to actually handle some of these pieces that are structurally intact, you know, that's something that will leave an impression in your mind for years and years to come. So this image over here, you know, unfortunately, but also at the same time, it gives a little more mystique. The artist that actually put this image on a pot probably didn't know that it was going to be part of our museum logo. And this design, this logo actually was probably lost for years and years until it was actually rediscovered. The National Museum for American Indian actually was founded, like Rachel mentioned, Gustav High, and he actually had a really good working relationship with Frederick Webb Hodge, which did the Howiko excavation, one of our sites west of the village. And this is actually where that pot came from. And now we're piecing the puzzle piece kind of together to get an understanding. We'll never get a complete understanding because a lot of our culture definitely was in the moment, I think. And they handled things in the moment. So this is something that we can hold on to. And we definitely know, and I've read about epidemics and other pandemics that our communities have gone through throughout the years. And we can actually hold a piece and say, you know what, this is just another thing that we're going to endure on into the future. And so again, anything that you can get on hands-on is really valuable. Next slide, please, Kelly. So this is our current building that we're located. So this is the Ashuapeu Museum Heritage Center. Ideally, we would definitely would love to have a new facility that is state of the art and has the environmental controls in check and everything else. The checklist of everything that is needed to be done. And when I came aboard in 2002, Zuni had already actually welcomed a partial part of the loan already. So there was already some pots here in 2001, I believe. And this was really spurred by a really good group of people within the community. Some people from council, some people that were working with the museum. I believe Tom Kennedy was the director at that time. And some really, really good people that were working hard to get that experience for our community people. From Zuni, we definitely know that there's a lot of things that have left our village. And slowly over time, we're starting to forget that things did leave. And now we do have an opportunity to go back by utilizing some of these objects, and a good conversation started to say, you know, this is a big part of who we are. And again, this building that you see right in front of you is the building that we are in. Actually, I am in right now. This building is not the youngest. It was actually originally a trading post built around 1910, 1911, and worked as a trading post all the way up into the 70s or 80s. And then from there, it was kind of disoccupied for a while. And there was some ideas on what it could be. And with the loan coming in, it actually went towards the museum. And as I started off working with the museum, I was definitely conflicted on a lot of different things. One of them was like environmental controls. And like Rachel had mentioned, it's like they come from the desert, they should be okay, kind of thing. And that's one of the things at the time, experience outweighed those kind of thoughts from the initial part of me working here. So over time, I've definitely noticed and taking notes and worked with great people from the Smithsonian to come and check on the objects every few years. It was originally only supposed to be a 3-4 year loan, I believe, at that time. And since then, we've been renewing this loan every 2 years. So this is something I believe that is very, very invaluable for us. And hopefully, we're just justifying and make a bigger case that we need our own building sometime in the future. Definitely not saying that for today because we know the reality of COVID and other things, other factors that make that complicated, but definitely in the future, I think these objects, us as a people, we definitely need conversation pieces to keep bits and parts of our culture going. And this is something that definitely, again, this is, you might struggle with this in your communities, but for us, we're finding a really interesting time teaching our kids the traditional values at times. You know, we're very fortunate at times that we have elders in our families, but sometimes those conversations don't happen. Sometimes you need a photo, sometimes you need an object, sometimes you need something to help spark a conversation to make these younger generations realize how fortunate they are to have elders in the community. And if they're a direct grandparent to you, that's all the better. So for this building, I think that's something that we really definitely recognize, and we help and try to facilitate that conversation with families to say, and that's one of the best parts of my job is where I can take a step back from a community group that's coming in, and one of the elders takes the lead and starts talking about history. And that's one of the things that I love the most is like, I don't have to be involved. Not because I don't want to be, it's just because I know and recognize that there is a lot more wisdom that is outside and that we can all share. So I'm definitely appreciative of this building, and I'm very appreciative of the people at the Smithsonian that have been working with us the past 19 years to keep this loan here and keep it safe and keep the good conversations going. And I've definitely seen kids coming over the years, 3, 4, 5 years old, and now they're in their early 20s, and now they come in and they have a different perspective of things that they walk through and they see. And like those conversations are really, really like awesome and amazing. I remember these little kids coming in and having a youthful conversation with them, and like they're all looking at different things. There's a mastodon jawbone in our exhibit gallery over here that's not part of the Smithsonian loan, but it definitely gives an idea of what was Zuni like in the past. So these objects help spur those conversations. So this building and a lot of other things, I know it looks like we're closed, but we're just working with the older building that we have. So we're doing our best that we can. Next slide, please, Kelly. So this is the front. And if you saw earlier, if you logged on, I actually was in the tidal wall area of our exhibition area. The acoustics were not great, and I think the signal was not best. So I moved to this location. But this is our tidal wall, so Hawaii Kwai Customer Past. And this exhibition is up, and this tidal wall over the years, again, it just has taken many forms of life over the years for me, and I think for everybody within the community. And as people come in, I think they see the beauty of a lot of different things. And when we have a conversation about how it's alone, I think that's something that really initially angers a lot of people here. It says, why is it alone? It's ours. It was taken from us from this excavation that had happened at Hauiku. And, you know, we're finding this really interesting documentation trail, this paper trail of how things occurred and how it was really misrepresented and how things were taken advantage of at that time. And so objects, whether we know it or not, in the long term of things, when they're home, they cause that ripple effect of wanting to find out more. And I think that's one of the things that actually helps have me stay here at the museum for so long, is that I definitely have come to really see this again in a lot of different ways. And it's forced and challenged me to think a lot of out of my normal box that I'm comfortable with, and challenge a lot of different things. The tidal wall that you see in front of you, the spiral that you see there, normally these spirals that are in rock art or petroglyphs, is denoting movement. So from us as Zuni, from our emergence and migration moving along, and that important conversation piece on into the future, we don't know what's going to happen. And that's why it tapers off on this one. So we control the message. And that's one of the things that I think is important, is that for community members to drive this message of identity and also an important part of who we are. So when those items fit, maybe today or maybe tomorrow, or maybe 5-10 years from now, that's the hope for us to continue to do different things. And you never know how big of an effect that this will have on into the future. When I first started, I definitely, it challenged me to different ways of thinking and thinking about museum standards and all that kind of stuff. So I was definitely coached by my really good friend. And from there, we had to kind of stop communication for a period of time. So I was studying a lot about museum practices and other things, and also working with our Smithsonian connection there and our former director, Tom Kennedy, and a lot of the people that we're working with. And we really realized that, you know, we can do a lot of these things. And when we had all our ducks in a row at that time, unfortunately, over time, life happened. And so we had to fill in some areas that we had to. Some of the mounts that are here, I had to make myself. And that was just, you know, for me, we definitely needed things happened on a time schedule. So things were really challenging us for that. But I think that's one of the things that they probably wanted us. And when I say they, I definitely know and recognize that these objects have a spirit, they have a life. And that's one of the things that I think here, working here for so long, I've definitely known to recognize that this is a really unique place. And that I definitely get these interesting vibes at times. You know, I definitely feel welcomed at sometimes. And some days, you know, I feel like, okay, I'll be back. Or a lot of different things, and approach it in a very cultural manner to say, okay, this is an understanding that we have. And so who best can say that is from someone from the community. And hopefully I am doing justice for that. I'm doing my best for that. But I definitely had conversations about this. So when COVID hit, I think after the first month or two, when we had to go out of the building and stay home for very good reasons, I would come into the office to check up on the building, to check up on different things. Sometimes I felt a very heavy vibe here. And I could have ignored it, but I definitely wanted to engage in it somehow. So I definitely walked around and I looked around and I had a conversation, from an outside perspective. It probably seemed like I was talking to myself. But I was really having a very good heart-to-heart conversation with the artifacts. And it gave me a different perspective and a different understanding of ourselves as Native communities on how we've endured different things throughout history, and we still continue. And that was one of the biggest things that I asked of this place, of these objects, is to hold tight, to be strong, give us the strength to continue, and to have the understanding that, this is something that we don't want, but this is something that we have to do. And, it was really finding those odd parallels of working within COVID and working within the museum setting that really started to make me think and appreciate a lot of things that have happened in my life, from working here at the museum and being blessed to be part of this, the caretakers of these objects that are here. I was not part of the selection committee, but I know the people that were, and I can't speak well enough of these great people that actually helped bring these objects back. And some of these people were artists, and some were on council, some were museum staff, and other really, really good people that came from the community that provided a foot in the door. And now we've opened that and we brought these back. And like I mentioned, they have a presence. And one of the ways that we, and it was a big controversial thing for us in the communities. Should we allow these to come back? Because this is something that is not the norm. And again, museums, excavations, all the things that are not part of our knowledge system, or may not be traditional, we definitely have all these questions as well. And one of the things that actually helped settle a little bit of that was when these objects came home, it rained. And for us in Zuni, and I think for a few other Native tribes, that's a good sign. That's like one of the best signs that actually could be put out there, is that our ancestors came back and welcomed these objects to come home. And that was one of the most meaningful things that I've ever experienced and seen. And it was really, really surreal. I'm definitely devout in a lot of our cultural practice and beliefs, and part of the prayer system and all that kind of stuff. And when you see it happen, there's no words that can explain how good it feels to be a part of the culture that you do. And I like to relay the message to people and still at the same time challenge that notion of what's appropriate. For our loan here, we have one of the highest loans that was given to a source community. And for that, I think definitely it's an important thing to note that there's thousands of objects that's still at the Smithsonian. And for good reasons for us now, I think that's where they should be, because they're taken care of until we can actually, again, justify something that we can have these objects back. But again, this is something that really is an important pebble in the water, the ripple effect, to go out and to grow and to establish these connections with great people like Rachel and Kelly and a few other people that I can't come to mind right off the bat. But definitely these really great people that actually help contribute to that. And we definitely have taken over some of the messaging of this. It's like, they're home. Smithsonian can actually bring them back, but that's something that if that happened for whatever reason, we'll deal with those instances if that comes. But for now, they're home, and we love them being home. So this is a big part of a lot of different things, and for a lot of us here, we definitely appreciate it. Next slide, please. So this over here is part of the exhibition gallery space that we have here. So these are the pots that came home. And over the years, it's been really one of my quests to actually find out why did they pick these pots, and things from a very ignorant perspective. I'm not a potter, so I could not tell you how important and how the shapes were, the colors were, a lot of things that happened. Only an artist that has that experience can actually convey that message. So that's something that has been amazing to have these artists come in and say, oh, this is why we picked it. And this is what we think. And you see these tying into different stuff. So this was a really important part of it. And if we could do a 360 on this part of the gallery, you would see that this actually display was intended to have like you're on the rooftops of one of the villages. And you're looking around 360 and it goes in the day to night kind of thing. So it allowed us also to be artistic where we could be and to allow us to express ourselves in a way that only we can. So this is something that was really, really important. And one of the things that definitely I'm trying to think about now is how we have to engage with these objects in a COVID kind of, the COVID time, in a pandemic. So right now, as we speak, we're working on a virtual exhibition of these items. And I would definitely love to have some of the artists and maybe people that were involved in the selection process to have something virtual available. I definitely don't want that to be the only thing available. I still want people to come here to experience on their own and to see these objects, these amazing pieces, to see them on, eye to eye in a kind of way, looking at it. So this is something that is really, really important. And to have people come in, again, those perspectives are priceless. These objects coming in is invaluable. And I've definitely done the general facility report for the building and other stuff, all the documentation that has to be put in for the Smithsonian requirements. But this is something that I think is the star of the show, is the objects itself. And we definitely know how to take care of things that we take care of today. From stuff in the past, we definitely need a little bit of support at times. And that's where Smithsonian has been really awesome and really has worked well with us to keep this loan going and to keep things happening. And we've been really appreciative of that. And again, this has kind of spidered off into different objects and programs and conversations where you should be led. So this is something, again, for your communities, if you're thinking about it, I will keep those conversations going. Next slide, please. So again, this is a place normally that's just driven by heading over to get, and if you're familiar with Zuni, there's Halona Chicken that's kind of famous here. I'm not sure if Kelly and Rachel can verify that, or maybe that's a biased opinion. But just going from point A to point B, and since the loan came back, we've seen more people coming in, and now I think we definitely, with COVID, I think once hopefully we can reopen in a very safe manner, we'll be able to draw more people in. I think that's one of the things that really has kind of surfaced, is that this has really slowed us down in some good and also some bad ways, but it's also kind of showed us what we should appreciate. And I think that's a lot of conversations. Our museum itself, we do have a Facebook page, and I've been throwing a few things out there for people to think about. And it's been fun to have these conversations and get these comments. And I think people now will be more open to the idea of visiting the museum more regularly if they haven't already. And this is something that we hope to be here for years and years to come. Next slide. That was the end for me. I definitely want to respect Lydia's time also. And if you have any questions for me, definitely, I think we can save that towards the end. But I'll let Lydia take over. Thanks, Elakwa.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, Lydia Forthorns. I'm the Cultural Center General Manager for the Shakopee Mdewakanton Sioux community. And I'd like once again to extend a very big thank you to Rachel and Kelly for participating and being a part of this presentation. I think that it's a great partnership to to be able to have this opportunity to talk about our project. And I always enjoy listening to Curtis's presentation as well, because, you know, every project is different. And I enjoy listening to, you know, the various similarities that we have, and yet, you know, our differences, and sometimes how, you know, those differences aren't as extreme, but we are two different very real projects. And, you know, I've worked for various tribes here in the Midwest, in South Dakota, Minnesota, and Wisconsin, in development mainly. I had the fortunate experience of using my museum studies degree and my development and planning for economic development in tribal communities, and been able to use that in my design background on this project that I have here that I'm working with. And my experience in the past as a fellow intern, and did some contract work with the Smithsonian, particularly in conservation and in collections. So I think that it was through developing those relationships that made part of this transition for this loan a little bit easier, because it can be daunting. The Smithsonian is a large institution, and there are a lot of avenues to go through in order to get to the right person that, you know, you need. And, you know, sometimes there's people, you know, you just never know. You just kind of toss it out there, and, you know, I have a tiny request and you just don't know if you're ever going to get a response. And, you know, the Smithsonian is not the only institution that we looked at for borrowing. It was the first, obviously. I'm very familiar with the collection. I had some experience with when we were unpacking the exhibit on the Audubon in the Upper Bronx. So before the big glamorous building opened in DC, in Suitland. So I was very familiar with, you know, the need for Native people to be involved in the work that we do in the museum field. And, you know, knowing what the mission of the Smithsonian at that time, National Museum American Indian and Museum American Indian, hearing that as a young person, I think the first time I heard it was when I was in 8th grade, I think. Dating me, but I just, so, you know, it's a little twofold, you know, just because it can seem daunting, and, you know, there are people too, and, you know, getting to the right person, I think is critical to you know, getting that follow up. But yeah, so this is us. We are located, if anyone was a part of the call last week, we are located 35 minutes from Minneapolis on the Shakopee, Midwauken, and Sioux Community Trust, newly acquired trust land. So we've been open for a year, and 88,000 square feet. We're on about, I think, 7 acres of land here. Behind the building, they are developing residential areas for homes, and potentially a government center located to the north of the building on the left side of the screen, and then on the south, potential clinic or a school. So this is sort of like a new developed area on the reservation. Okay, next slide. Our exhibit is the Midwauketon. They set their teepees up next to the Spirit of the Lakes. That photo right there, if you can kind of see in the background, that's that is actually a photo that we had permission to use from the MHS, the Minnesota Historical Society. And it is, I don't know if anyone has ever been to Minneapolis, but it's from, I think it was 1815 on Minnehaha Falls. So if you've ever been to that area, it's incredible because it's so developed right now, and I would never think that there would be teepees in that spot. Next slide. So the beginning of our project started in 1993 under Norman Crook's administration. 10 years later, they developed a master plan which prioritized constructing the facility. There had been discussion. The original community cultural center turned into a restaurant, and then later on into a bingo casino area. So I believe from what I understood, the community gathering and community type meetings kind of sort of happened in sort of makeshift areas around those buildings. I think that they talked a little bit about when we were developing the exhibit, they talked a bit about, you know, how people would come together in trailers and, you know, people's basements and various kitchens previous to having an actual facility just for community gathering. 2013 was the master plan, which prioritized the facility, and in 2015, finally a design was selected. It took that amount of years to actually come to a final decision on, you know, the capacity that they wanted to have for the facility and what was important, and to get the community input for building a facility like this. Next slide. So this is the core group of people that we worked with and working with the community. Specifically myself, the Culture and Historic Preservation Work Group consisted of 6 to 12 community members. That photo here on the bottom left is our first kickoff meeting with Split Rock Studios. It was just if you could see the little Post-its on the back, that sort of brainstorming and jogging some discussion on what was really intended for the exhibit. It is like another topic, because they had just finished design development of the facility itself. So that was a long process. And then when we started working on the exhibit, that was a whole nother thing with, you know, developing colors and, you know, what do we want and what is the message. And so that's kind of what you're seeing there on the left. That was our very first meeting with Split Rock Studios. On the right is towards the end. So we do have a community theater, and once we moved out of our trailer, because I worked in a trailer here for a few years on site. So it was nice to be able to see that one of these days it was going to be the end of using a porta potty, but it was good to see the building actually coming up. But this is one of our community members, and they are reviewing and editing some of the graphics for the exhibit. Next slide. So we had a lot of work to be done. The community did have a collection, and it was housed in a modified RV storage unit, which is, it was accommodating. It was very small. It was cramped. The tribe hadn't specifically hired a collections manager, so they were database was through Past Perfect, but there was a lot of work that still needed to be done. Full photographs, locations assigned, you know, conditions reported, you know, everything needed to, and there was just me. So I had to develop staffing, get on a collections manager, write the positions, get them posted for both the 2 staff members that were going to help with our very first comprehensive inventory. So this is all happening at the same time as the construction and the design of the building and the exhibit development. So I've been here for 4 years, and that first year was pretty busy establishing policy, getting ready for anticipating a loan with the Smithsonian, because I knew that all of these things needed to happen in place first. So knowing, I could say, what our scope gap was in the collection was important. And at that point, we were working on design with Split Rock, and there were some areas that we did, you know, at that point, these were the things that we knew we needed to look further for. But it turned out once the collection, it was kind of interesting because once I did have my collections manager and our technician complete our first inventory, there were actually some items that, you know, we were able to fulfill in with those gaps that, you know, were kind of missing in our storyline. Yes, and the collections moved. So in addition to all of that, we had to move our entire collection from the RV storage unit into the building as well. Next slide. So I talked a little bit about the design development. Yeah, our object research was balanced with inventorying our collection and prioritizing. I think that one of the biggest things that I encounter, and this is just sort of, you know, something that I think maybe a lot of other tribes encounter as well, but in specific, you know, you run into what has been categorized, how we've been categorized, and our objects have been labeled. And I could, you know, run a query for anywhere from, let's see, Eastern Sioux, Woodland Sioux, the Great Lakes Sioux. So it's important when, if you have very specific areas, that you broaden your scope when you do ask NMAI for collections, a catalog report. I was able to talk about what possibilities we could be coming into. And what made it even more interesting is they sent me the entire list, yet I knew that there were items that were categorized as Sioux that were particularly more that should have been sort of labeled as Eastern Sioux, or, you know, closer to Dakota versus just Plains. So that's why I put in there prioritizing the Mdewakanton Sioux scope, Mdewakanton Dakota scope, because it can be a little bit difficult even if you were to put in the specific band of Mdewakanton. Okay, next slide. So we did, I think that, you know, I mentioned just a minute ago about, you know, when we went on site and visited the Smithsonian. This is our group of delegates that came. We did have a gal, like I said, you know, before she went, and she said that this type of visit, it changed her life. For the most part, our members, this is the first time that they've ever done anything like this. And we were very, very fortunate that we had the resources to be able to do this. That gentleman there in the back with the green hat, he's our cultural resources director, Mr. Leonard Wabasha. And he's our hereditary Dakota chief. So he is also, he holds a high cultural and spiritual significance for people here. He has a lot of cultural knowledge, and he's actually a descendant of a gentleman who was at Fort Snelling. So he had item that was repatriated back to his family. So he's been through the process of working with the state on getting what is rightfully belongs to his family back. So he was able to provide some input when we did go and visit the collections about some traditional care and identifying certain areas, you know, with the Dakota pieces that, you know, that we noticed that when we were on site. So that to me was also really, really critically important. It's really hard to get him to travel. He's an elder. One of the great parts about this loan was, you know, he was able to come on the trip. He don't travel very much. He doesn't really care for it. I did shuffle him off to the Field Museum, which was kind of fun, but he's there to, you know, he's a great resource, and I'm glad to be fortunate to work with him. He has a lot of knowledge, and it's just, you know, it's hard, you know, to have those elders come with you and make those kinds of trips. But if you have one that's willing to go, then it's all the more better. Because he was able to look at some of the religious and ceremonial things that, you know, we were there while we were there, and and felt like, you know, that this was work that he, you know, could come back to and, you know, have other things to say. But it's an incredible journey. And if you can do it, I highly recommend, you know, making that trip to NMAI. The space, the building that they developed is a beautiful, welcoming space, where they even have what is the name of the room that they put people? There's like a prayer room that you can go.
Oh, the ceremonial room?
Yeah, that room.
Mhm.
That I really appreciated being able to have, you know, privacy in there and let you have a moment, because it can. I mean, I've worked with the collection at NMAI. It can be really um, intimidating, and the enormity of everything. It's I've also been on the other side of welcoming tribes there, so I've seen, you know, how people feel, you know, emotional and the spiritual connection of having to go so far in order to see what rightfully belongs to the people. And so that can be an incredible change too as well. So it's great that they have that space and that they recognize that, you know, it's an emotional journey to have to go all the way to the East Coast to be able to do that. But I highly recommend being able to go. There are things that are categorized in the collection that, you know, kind of lead you in a different direction until you're actually there and you're like, hey, that's totally, you know, should probably be going in this direction. But so all at the same time, our scope was determined. We knew we had a timeline. Our budget, the budget was another sort of a working budget. I was able to submit an idea of what I thought it was going to be, but you don't really know until actually you have come to the end. There are parts within developing an exhibit that, you know, you just don't know if your glass is going to come on time, or if certain parts of the components of, you know, your casework is going to be there on time. And it's, you know, it all has to happen all at the same, and make sure that, you know, you meet your deadline. So that's another big piece I think that we talked a little bit about yesterday and in the last presentation as well. Next slide. So I talked a little bit about the implementing. As you know, we were done, we selected our objects, we, you know, had an idea. I talked with the conservation department. The conservation department was incredible about working with us and, you know, communicating with us on what we thought was going to be, you know, as part of the stipulations and guidelines and the registration department as well. This is the case that houses most of the objects from the Smithsonian. We were, you know, really fortunate to be able to have one of the conservators here on site. And so she came with the, traveling with the exhibit. It was a constant coordination with the mount maker and the courier, and, you know, fitting the deadlines. As she mentioned a little bit in the past, the general facility report, I thought, you know, putting that document together and having that in place was really key to keeping the coordination with all the various departments that the tribe has. So they were able to use that, and I had the signed document by the chairman to be able to say, you know, this is what other departments are vested in making sure that this is in compliance with the Smithsonian, and making sure that our building is, you know, fitting the requirements, you know, that we need to have this loan. So next slide. This is our exhibit cases. There's Susan Hill came. She was our designated conservator. She came as a courier with the objects. And, you know, for as long as it took to do the development and the planning piece, the install was actually, you know, it was, I mean, you got to realize we were opening a building and an exhibit at the same time. So there were a lot of things going on, coordinating the grand opening and getting the gift shop done and our object install. So it was a fast and furious time. But I was, glad to be able to have Susan on hand to help facilitate with the install. And the install is actually a lot quicker than I thought it was going to be. But it went smoothly. Next slide. And I think that those are kind of my takeaway from everything is if you can have some contingency funds, that would be great. I know that, we talked a little bit about planning ahead of time for an exhibit, and keeping your timeline is important to keeping on budget. And the earlier you can start, the better. Even if you were to say, if you add like another 2 years in planning, because a lot of times there's some capital funds that you'll need to raise for fundraising, because it is not cheap. I had a question last week on our presentation. How much did it cost? And it was close to $130,000 for the entire just the Smithsonian portion of the loan. So we have a total of 149 objects on display, and 38 of those are from NMAI. I think that's all I have. If anyone else wants to, I think I'm done.
I'm gonna stop sharing.
Thank you. I want to say thank you to ATOM for hosting this, and also to Lydia and Curtis for contributing. It makes me and I so happy to know that our borrowers are happy, and also that the process is visible, and we want to make sure that the process stays visible. So does anyone, I'm typing an answer into the chat right now as we speak. There are any questions that anyone wants to ask? We still have a few minutes.
This is Laura. I was just curious, what software do you use now for your collection?
At NMAI?
No, at this last.
At Shakopee. Lydia?
Yeah.
Argus. Lucidia, we're working with Argus.
Argus?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a part of another process. When I came on board, they were using Past Perfect, and it just didn't suit our needs at the time. With the whole inventory needing to be accomplished and then the collections move, and why don't we bring on just unload it all, new staff, new software, move, new exhibit, new buildings. So yeah, we decided to.
That's a lot all at once. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I have a question. The 130,000 was for what again?
Well, we calculated it was for the mount maker, the courier, and the conservation work, and that's not including the graphics and illustration and fabrication. So that is just the requirements for that, the total financial requirements of the loan.
Okay, so this was specifically only for the objects that came from NMAI?
NMAI, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And how many objects was it again?
38. Actually, I think we could take, I guess it would be like 120, because I have to apologize. There was a portion that we used a local conservator. We're fortunate to have the Midwest Arts Conservation Center located here in Minneapolis. So we utilized them to do the conservation work on our collection. So yeah, about 120 for their NMAI loan.
Oh,
But that, I don't know if anyone else wants to chime in from NMAI, but that's kind of why it's important for somebody to be delegated to see the objects, because some of them needed a lot of work. And, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be the case for, the objects that you choose, because it depends on what, is the final piece. There were some items that I really had my heart on, and, I depleted. But they ended up having, to be costly, so.
Right. So conservation generally charges by the hour. So it depends on how much work is involved. If you have an object that needs a lot of work in order to be safely displayed, it's going to cost more than an object that needs only basic stabilization or documentation in order to be lent out.
And as we mentioned, there's usually a preliminary survey done when the loan is first requested, and the conservators take a look at the objects and estimate how much time they think it will take to get them ready for shipping and for exhibition. And so you have an idea then, as you're looking at your object list, how much each object is going to cost you in case you want to make any priority decisions.
Yeah, we had some priorities.
I had a question. Curtis, you said, I think, that your loan is like a renewable every 2 years.
Yeah.
And then Lydia, is your loan comparable, or what's the
Yeah,
status?
we just renewed our loan for another 2 years. So our next loan will be up in actually, no, 3 years.
NMAI generally, we don't lend in an indefinite way. We can't say, here's your loan, let us know when you want to send it back. But we generally accept that larger loans to, to communities that have a facility that want to make these objects part of their permanent exhibitions stories would be renewable. So we just want to keep an eye on it and make sure that everything is maintained in a proper way. And some objects can't be on display for forever based on their nature, particularly things like textiles or paper objects have a shorter exhibition life, generally speaking. So sometimes we can work with you on rotations of objects if there are multiple objects of the same type, or just knowing that, some of those objects might have to come back after a certain amount of time. We have a very large loan up at, in Anchorage at the Anchorage Museum in their Arctic Studies Center. It's like, 150, 170 some odd objects. And most of them have been there for 10 years now. And that loan just renewed for another 2 years. But, we assess it from time to time to see, this object isn't doing so well in the way that it's been mounted. It probably needs to come back before it's there for another X number of years. So, we're always just trying to check up on things and make sure that the objects are as safe as possible. But, which is why we don't do just loans that don't have a clear end date. But, we work with you on those renewals, and they're not usually overly painful either. As I hope Curtis
Hopefully not.
test.
I had a quick question.
Mhm.
You brought up the Anchorage Museum, and last year we had a major earthquake here. And those cases, actually some of the objects had gotten shifted. How did you guys deal with that? So because we're in earthquake country, so if there is something like a natural disaster, I know insurance covers it, but did you actually want those objects to go back to NMAI so you could take a look at them, or were they just allowed to stay there and a conservator just had to take care of it?
So we worked very closely with the Anchorage Museum after that earthquake, and the damage to the cases was extensive. And so as soon as it was stable and safe, we actually sent a team from NMAI up to Anchorage, and the Anchorage Museum's insurance paid for the staff to come and assess how those objects were doing. You know, had they shifted on their mounts? Did they need to adjust the mounts? What needed to happen? Because because the cases broke, they actually had to go up and deinstall all of those objects. So, you know, it was a significant undertaking, and we had to wait until the cases were, there was sort of a timeline. You know, the case glass had to be ready so that they could go up and deinstall, and then give them time to reinstall the cases, the glass and the panels. And then the NMAI team went back and reinstalled the objects. So, you know, but we also, because it's a long-term loan, we have a very close relationship with the staff up there, and they have great conservators on staff. And, you know, so we trust when they say, you know, this one looks a little bit shakier than this other one, we're going to take a look at it, versus, you know, I think it's safer to leave it in place until you guys can come up and see it. You know, we're going to work with them on those kinds of issues. It's not you know, just because you have earthquakes, we're not going to say, nope, you can't have a loan. I'm sorry. There's, you know, we're going to work with you extensively on stuff like that. Additionally, the mounts for those Anchorage, what's really extraordinary about the Anchorage loan is that the mounts made for those objects were made with the potential for an earthquake in mind, and they did exactly what they were supposed to do. So it goes to show that a lot of planning, if the longer you can spend planning and the more thought you get planning these kinds of things with potential events in mind, the safer those objects are going to be. Nothing was damaged besides pieces, because the mounts acted exactly as they were supposed to act in an earthquake. So kudos to the mount making for that show.
So that's definitely taken into account. If you live in an earthquake zone, that's going to be taken into account when the mounts are being planned.
And that's why the general facilities report is so important. And, you know, no, we don't want to use that to say, oh, they live in an earthquake zone, or, oh, they're in a floodplain, or, oh, their environmentals aren't perfect. We're not going to say, take one look at that and say, oh, they don't get a loan. The purpose of that document is so that we have all the information that we can have so that we can plan with you how to create the safest environment for the objects.
Right. So any other questions? It's been such a great presentation, very informative.
Thank you. And, you know, if anybody has more questions or they think of it, you're welcome to get in touch with us.
I will be posting a copy of the PowerPoint and, of course, a recording of this webinar on our website. And I know Rachel had mentioned the General Facilities Report, and she's actually going to do a webinar on that in November. So that will be
more detail to come. I think Melissa's getting out. Melissa.
Oh, am I blipping out? Sorry. My internet is kind of funky today. All right. Well, thank you so much. I hope you all have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.